Okay, I think that Karina has us sorted out.
I do too.
I'm gonna just spotlight you both, and thanks again, also looking forward to it.
Thank you everybody who bravely helped get the live stream going. So we're live on YouTube. Another word to those who have more recently joined is that we are live streaming to YouTube. So if you do not want your face or voice on YouTube, please keep that in mind and mute yourself and / or turn your camera off. I think maybe we'll wait for another minute to allow everybody to get here, but thank you everybody who is here right now, and we'll get started in just a moment.
Jillian, I'm just going to run and get my issue of Hand Paper Making magazine to supplement the slides I
Sounds
have.
good.
Be right back.
All right, what do you think? Shall we get started?
Go for it.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Rice Babies, 6 books, 1 misnomer, many conversations with 2022 Book Art Research Fellow Alta L. Price. My name is Jillian Lee. I'm librarian at Center for Book Arts. Before we get started today, I would like to acknowledge that Center for Book Arts is on unceded territory of the Lenni Lenape people. I would also like to make a few notes on accessibility. Live captions are available. They are on, as you can see. I think that they should be on for everybody, but there's a CC button on the bottom of the Zoom screen if you can't see them. The event is being live streamed and recorded and will be available to view online afterwards. If you don't want your face or name to appear, please keep your video off, and you can rename yourself if you would prefer, but we'll also have a spotlight on Alta, so I think that only they will actually appear. Please also, unless you are participating or asking a question, keep yourself muted, just to keep the background noise at a minimum. This program and the Book Arts Research Fellowship is generously supported by the Pine Tree Foundation of New York. And now I'll quickly introduce Alta. Alta L. Price runs a publishing consultancy specialized in literature and nonfiction texts on art, architecture, design, and culture. Alta holds a BFA from the Rhode Island School of Design and an MFA from Hunter College. Alta's translations from German and Italian have appeared on BBC Radio 4, Words Without Borders, Specimen, and elsewhere. Alta has published over 40 book translations, including work by Giorgio Agamben, Dana, oh, I'm so sorry, Alta.
No worries.
Dana
Grigorcha.
Oh, fabulous. Alexander, what's this surname?
Kluga.
Great. Yep. Aldo Novarese.
Perfect.
And Mithu Sanyal. Alta's translation of Julie Zay's novel New Year was shortlisted for the 2022 Penn Translation Prize and the Helen and Kurt Wolf Prize, and Zay's latest novel, About People, is forthcoming in Alta's translation from World Editions later this year. Now I would like to pass the proverbial microphone to Alta for our talk today.
Thank you so much, Jillian. And it's actually perfect that we had a little pause and a thought about how to pronounce some of my authors' names, because that is just where I live every day, all day, both in my translation work, but also, I've actually tuned into a lot of the Center for Book Arts presentations, and I encourage everyone, thank you everyone for attending the Zoom. The archive on the YouTube live stream is really wonderful. And I was going to try not to get too personal in today's presentation, but I think it's a little bit inevitable. So I'll start out by saying, my name, Alta, was given to me by my parents. They found it in a baby names book and they thought it sounded pretty. They had no idea that it's just an adjective in multiple languages, and an adjective that means different things. So my name is routinely confused with other names like Alba, Alma, Alda, Olga. And it means tall in most Romance languages. It means other in Romanian. One of my authors who writes in German is Romanian. And it means old. And in slang, it means dude in German. So I bring all of that to this presentation because I do think it undergirds my interest in language and really what's in a name and how we talk about things. So to give you sort of an overview today, I really view this talk as an almost not even a halfway point, but a little snapshot of the very beginning of my research that I did at the Center for Book Arts at the end of 2022 that is very much ongoing. It will culminate, or I shouldn't say culminate, it will result also in an article for Book Arts Review, the new print and online publication that Center for Book Arts has organized. So, and that, basically, it was such an honor to get this research fellowship at the Center for Book Arts. And my program was far too ambitious for a mere 2-week period. So I want to share with you today some of the remarkable works that I saw in the archives and start following, teasing out the threads and the connections that those works led me to, both within the collections at the Center for Book Arts and within the Center for Book Arts community, the people I met while I was in the shop, and in the archives and in the library, the people I met in the orbit around the Center for Book Arts, outside of it at other institutions. And then I will note, not to put Angela Lawrence on the spot, but one of the artists whose work you're about to see, whose work I looked at while I was at the center, has joined us today. And if Angela is able and willing, we'll have a look at in more depth at some of her more recent work as well. So with that, I will dive in with my screen share and the PowerPoint. Hopefully the images are interesting and visible and understandable. I also realize, and all of this is connected, sorry, and of course I'm getting a call because I didn't turn off my phone. The recent conversation that we're having as a society around technology, specifically ChatGPT, and what happens online, the difference between public spoken discourse and what people write and how people manifest themselves online versus out in the world. All of this is, to give you a little peek inside my mind, what I'm bringing to the works I'm looking at. I mention all of that also because some of you will be watching with closed captioning. I will do my best to enunciate well so that the machine that is doing the closed captioning accurately captures what I'm saying. But sometimes bizarre things happen in closed captioning. I also want to make this present and visible in my talk because it is a real issue with archiving. How information gets transmitted. And now that so much is being done by machines, if there aren't humans to check it, mistakes can get perpetuated. And if not mistakes, just misunderstandings. So I think if there's one thing, I hopefully won't harp on too much, but if you have one thing to take away today, it's really that I think human discourse, listening and paying attention to what others say, how they talk about their work is very important. So let me share my screen. Are you all able to see that? I see some, great, thank you. And this really is an intentionally provocative, ridiculous title. Shout out to editor Mina Takahashi, also in the audience today. Maybe Mina, if you want to participate later in the talk and chime in. This really, I hesitated to take the same exact title from my Hand Paper Making magazine article, but it just works. So Rice, Rice Baby, 6 books, 1 misnomer, many conversations. 6 books are the books that I began looking at the Center for Book Arts. The 1 misnomer is rice paper. And I also want to invite anyone who's attending today who's convinced, in your experience, rice paper is artistic. It is a type of paper. I in no way want anyone to feel called out or embarrassed or ashamed. It is really investigating the complications of the names and language that we use. The many conversations part of my subtitle is the connections with artists and archivists and other creatives that I had while I was doing this research that will continue on. Now, where this started, I just wanted to get this out of the way. It very much started, the absurd. So my interest in paper, of course, started when I was an undergraduate. I was studying printmaking. I had the privilege to have gotten a scholarship to study abroad, and I was looking for an opportunity to work with a local artist. And the program put me in touch with this artist that they had said, oh, this is a great, local printmaker. And I called up this artist, and he said, yeah, I was a printmaker, but now I'm making paper. So if you want an internship assisting me in my paper making studio, I will welcome you for that. And I was not interested in paper at all at the time. I had very limited notions of what handmade paper was and what it could do. I loved art, I loved printmaking, I loved the history of book arts, but and type, but the paper was really out of left field for me. But I fell in love with it. And never once did that artist actually use the term rice paper. So one of the issues I have in talking about this topic is that, and I've had this with several colleagues, really thought, surely this isn't something that needs to be talked about. Surely people in the papermaking world, in the book arts world, know that, in a nutshell, if it's something, if the rice paper you're talking about is something that you can make a book out of or draw on or print on, that is paper, but it is most likely not made out of rice of any sort. There are some exceptions. Rice straw is incorporated in some papers, but the rice grain that we eat does not have the strength required to make a suitable substrate. Whereas if the rice paper you're dealing with is edible, it's wrapping your spring roll, that indeed is made of rice, usually also with the addition of tapioca, but not necessarily paper. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll jump back to that. This really started, my title started with, this and this earworm, one of my least favorite words in the English language, but pretty appropriate. The earworm of a catchy song. So when I was a teenager, I remember hearing Vanilla Ice. It was inevitable everywhere in 1990 and the early 90s, that song Ice Ice Baby, which sampled the song that Queen and David Bowie did in 1980, first released in 1981 as a single, Under Pressure. And this, just a nod to notions of what is appropriation, what is stealing. There was a lawsuit that happened as a result of Vanilla Ice taking that song. Again, none of that has anything to do with paper, but it was this catchy thing that got in my head, and I thought, there's something here. These notions, because until I later, Queen is one of my favorite bands ever. So when I but my first discovery of that brief riff that is in Vanilla Ice's song Ice Ice Baby, I first encountered it through a secondary stolen experience. Only later did I discover it came from elsewhere, had a whole other different history. But of course, Vanilla Ice took it because it was catchy and he liked it. So this factors in to book arts and visual arts in general. So where it continued, Hand Paper Making magazine. And I really could probably give a ridiculously long talk just on the article that I wrote for Hand Paper Making. But it was a real honor to be able to contribute to this. This magazine has been published for over 35 years. They always have, I think you guys can see me next to the PowerPoint. They have, it's really gorgeous. It's no chance, it's not a coincidence that it's received many prizes. It always has, I'm trying to get back to the tipped in samples of various papers. So it's a gorgeous and very unique resource. So if you don't subscribe if you can, find it in your local library. I know a lot of institutions subscribe, hopefully more. So I had been a longtime reader, never ever thought about contributing until dear editor Mina Takahashi invited me to think about, really the subtitle of that was Rice, Rice Baby, What We Talk About When We Talk About Paper. And the rest of this issue, this was the summer, volume 37, number 1, summer 2022. And I know there's some Hand Paper Making subscribers in the audience as well. So hopefully you read the whole thing cover to cover. I gave an introduction, and then there were some fabulous additional articles, terminology and language, a conversation between Radha Pandey and Aisha Wahab, really, really superb. So nod to Hand Paper Making. That basically for me was a pretext to have a lot of really interesting conversations with people working from multiple languages. I did a little comparison. For those of you who don't know, our English word paper does, through various other steps in linguistic development, come from papyrus. So papyrus being a specific plant, and many people have called it a proto-paper. You think of ancient Egyptian scrolls. It is not considered a full-on paper because of how it is made. The fibers are layered. They're not macerated. But that is actually one thing. I won't go on too much of a tangent here because I want to stay focused on the Center for Book Arts collections. But it is an issue in the hand paper making community because as soon as you start drawing lines, this is paper, this is not paper, this is proto paper, this is primitive paper. You know, all of this language that we use hints to hierarchies and notions of validity or value. So that's where this started. And one of my MFA colleagues, Selden Yuan, who's also a poet, and I featured a couple of his poets in my article, had been an artist in residence at the Center for Book Arts a few years ago. So had shared with me the open call for this research fellowship, and it just felt perfect. I took a quick look at the center's catalog online, and I got 6 items. So before I go on to the 6 items that I got through the Center for Book Arts, a little nod to why this is a very relevant topic. I know it's iffy maybe to use the word contagion nowadays, that we are still very much in a global pandemic. But language is a contagion. We got, just like I first heard Vanilla Ice before I heard Queen. Each of us as individuals, we encounter things when something new enters our world and we talk to others about it, or it comes with a certain text attached, or our teacher tells us about it. The only language we have for it is the language that we're given. You know, I speak American English because I was raised in that environment. Forgive me if some of these are very basic notions, but they are very relevant, you know, important to keep in mind. So the contagion of language, basically, you know, I want to think people know that rice paper is not a thing, to use millennial terminology. But because it appears historically in many documents, because some people are not deep in the paper world, it is a term that is out there. So that's why I want to address it head on, and it's a misnomer. Nomer coming from the Latin for name, mis being not somewhat off, a misleading name. So the role of archival systems here is that, you know, in addition to looking at what was at the Center for Book Arts, I did a quick look in some other libraries. Since I'm based in Chicago, Potawatomi territory, I looked at the Newberry Library, and out of their, you know, millions of objects, I got 10 hits. And I share this, just one description, because it's very interesting to me. The title is incredibly long. It's in Spanish. And then you look at the subject, and the subject matter: licenses, Philippines, Spain, colonies, Philippines, politics and government. So this was printed in Manila. It's from 1644. The only reason this came up in my Newberry Library search is that the notes from the librarian say printed on rice paper. So I'll come back to that later in terms of the terminology that is used to archive. And again, while, you know, any archivists in the audience, toward the end, I would love to have a more open discussion about these, you know, identifiers that are used, the language that is attached, because it does have to be standardized. If you think about, if you grew up using a card catalog, there are set subject matters and notions, and they need to be uniform. The thing is, they also change over time. So it gets messy. The other example, like from pretty, I don't want to say pop culture because it's a multi-hundred-page book, but Michelle Obama's memoir, Becoming, on page 88, she mentions her family using rice paper to imitate flames in a fire. And, you know, it's a totally sideline comment. This, I had noticed it when I read Becoming. It came to the fore when I spoke to Amy Lee, who is an author and paper maker, and really the English language is, this is my title for her. I don't think she's ever said this, but I consider her the Anglophone world's authority on Hanji paper. She got a Fulbright to Korea, turned it into a book, does really amazing work, both book arts and weaving. So when she mentioned Michelle Obama's memoir, and I had seen it, I thought, okay, this is not just me. I'm not crazy. So these terms that we use work their way out into the world, and they live on. Now, one of my dear colleagues and friends who used to be at the Newberry Library pointed me to the Library of Congress. So I took a little shot of their catalog, and you see right here at the top, rice paper, comma, Chinese, use Xuanji. So that is basically they're acknowledging we used to use this term, use this new term. Interesting to me, the only appearance of rice paper together in the Library of Congress catalog or terminology list really looks at Chinese paper, because basically I think it is shorthand in the United States and elsewhere in the Anglophone world for, oh, it's Asian paper, it's rice paper. And I included my curator and librarian friend's notes because this is also very important to me. He pointed out the librarians, by the way, may perhaps be excused because rice paper was probably an authorized subject term in the old Library of Congress rules. The current version shows, and that's exactly what I've screenshot there. And I'll credit him, Paul Gell. I'm going to have a follow-up conversation with him about this before I write my article for Book Arts Review. But he says, my guess is that this means they have corrected an older term, but you would have to look at an old set of the Library of Congress terms to be sure of that. And of course, the Library of Congress is famous for enshrining old-fashioned, culturally specific, and racist language. As we know, however, language is just a tool. And I include that because this is sort of the mantra that I had to keep reminding myself of. Language is just a tool. For those of you who tuned in for last night's event at the Center for Book Arts, Lucchesa, Bronfman, Verissimo's presentation of their exhibit currently up at the Center for Book Arts. Tool was in the title, and tools for community building and connection. So tool was front of my mind, first and foremost. And tools really are neutral, right? They can be used for positive as well as negative ends. So as we know, however, language is just a tool. Now, let's have a look at what I requested and got to see at the Center for Book Arts. This is a very brief, the 6 book objects that I started out looking at. Rick Haynes, an untitled book from 1984. There were no words in this book. You can see the scale from my hands in the picture. It was very small. And in the description, that I don't, this comes up in several of the pieces. Where did the catalog description come from? Sometimes it comes from the artists. Descriptions can be taken from the artist's website or a statement the artist wrote. This was from 1984, so the artist did not have this. The artist does now have a website, and I invite you to check it out. But I believe the rice paper notion was added, again, without being able to talk to the cataloger. I cannot know exactly where it came from, but this does look like what comes to mind when people think rice paper. And I don't know, because there was no additional information whether this was a Mitsumata or a Kozo, clearly with additions in it. So this is just one of those mysteries. Next up, Angela Lawrence's Chewing Tzu, the Rumination book from 1993. And Angela actually there's a new catalog of her work. And I noticed in the new catalog, it's listed as mulberry paper. In these older documents, it's listed as rice paper. So this was a fascinating book. The other interesting element here is that it is mulberry paper, but there is the notion of consumption, edibility, chewing. This is actual chewing gum, which she printed on with food dye. And I believe it was actually featured, the Center for Book Arts had 2 copies. One of them was used in a performance. I think it might have been, I should check my notes, as recent as 2016. Angela can probably correct us later if I'm wrong on that. It looked from the additional documentation that came, and this is an example of where the documentation that came with it that is in the archive includes basically a printout from Angela's old website. And this is another amazing thing. We think everything can be instantaneously corrected because it's digital and it's not necessarily set in, we say set in stone, set in type, set in print on paper. But frequently things that are in an email or ephemeral communications get printed out to have the history. So this is actually one of the objects that I looked at that had the most information, including some correspondence around the performance. The third object I looked at was Gregory Christie's Sushi Tales from 2002. This was a handbound book. Gregory Christie is still a book artist, has gone on to produce many books. I believe does a lot of children's books. This piece was part of, and apologies to the center folks, because I know that the designation changed partway. There's artist in residence. He was in residence at the Center for Book Arts. I believe it was in 2001, 2002. So this was the result of that residency. As you can see, the typeface, I'm not one of those people who can identify typeface just by looking at it. I think some people in the audience might be. But this is, there's an entire category of typefaces that are, culturally, English, Latin characters that look like Hebrew, Latin characters that look like Japanese brush scripts. This is certainly one of those typefaces. Some of the stories heard were quite rude. I took this spread because the entire book, it's of course a unique piece. This is I believe when they refer to rice paper, both the cover paper, the decorative cover paper, and these diaphanous internal papers are probably what's being referred to in that description. But there's also collage and painting. Moving on, much more recent, Morgan Carruthers' book Loose Leaf, 2017. This was an accordion book. I took shots right as I opened the boxes that these are contained in, because it was such a moment of excitement for me, having seen the description and having no idea what I was getting. So this is quite a deep box, as you can see. And the entire book is shaped like a tea bag. And the accordion goes through one of the interesting things for me here as well is that hibiscus tea, the linguistic sticklers among us, some of you might have people who would say, well, hibiscus tea isn't really tea, it's just dried hibiscus flowers. And it's related to how we talk about things. Some people would say it's a hibiscus infusion to avoid that word tea, because for some people, tea is connected to a very specific plant. The other really interesting thing to my mind, was this came up in my search. The colophon here, which is the tag on the attached to the tea bag of the book, says that it was printed with Garamond on Rive BFK and Kozo rice papers. So there is a very, very recent use of this. What's interesting is it's the hybrid, right? Kozo is a specific kind of paper. So I almost appreciate that. And to move forward and to sort of where this research might be going, and my focus on Center for Book Arts as a real community building center, is that, I would not personally advocate for these 6 objects, we have to absolutely erase the term rice paper. It is a misnomer, it is misleading, but this right here gave, their use of Kozo rice paper gave me this idea that maybe, not that there's a middle way, but we need to open up the conversation and basically to really assist people in terms of their learning and their exploration of material and what they want to do conceptually. We need to have a continuity, right? So I wouldn't say just erase the term rice paper, because then the other problem there is that you would get people, who were looking for rice paper and they wouldn't find anything. I would rather that they find something like this, Kozo rice paper. Okay, what's Kozo? Sort of keep the conversation going. This is, let's see, what are we on? The 5th object is Robert Hahn's Routine Risks from 1976. The interesting thing with this one, I'm fairly certain the only reason rice paper was in the descriptor was the wrapper, the dust jacket, and perhaps the paper that was used to bind the cover. The description does specify that the internal pages here, you can see a really gorgeous, Western made paper. Those are from Wookey Hole, which is a specific mill in England. Some of us in the audience have Wookey Hole molds because the mill closed, and the mold and decals were available to the broader papermaking community. So that's an instance, this was a limited edition, but I don't believe the poet really had any hand necessarily in the design of the book. But that came up in my if you think of a catalog search as being sort of dragging a net through an ocean and you're catching certain things, this one came in with it. The sixth piece was Kamal Bulata's Jerusalem in Exile, Artist Books 2020. So this is the newest. The jacket, it was an interesting hybrid between a slipcase, because it was meant to function as a slipcase, but because it was, if I had to totally venture a guess, it felt like an etchy zen washi. I have a lot of etchy zen washi, and it had the same sort of laid pattern, really looked like that to me, and very, very, a strong paper, but not rigid. So I had quite a time getting this book back in the case. And this was a catalog of artist books. So one of the things I loved about my time at Center for Book Arts is I came across all of these books of books. So it's almost like Borges's, Garden of Forking Paths. I just kept seeing connections. The CBA library, of course, Dart Hunter's papermaking is right there. 2 copies actually. A little snapshot. Suki Hughes' wonderful book on washi. So there were some old friends already on the shelf when I got there. And I just think I included some fun snapshots. The Form of the Book, that's one of those where I loved the playfulness of the title, a book about the form of the book. And it has here, 10 common mistakes in designing books. And that was right within the front flap. So, but it's also the kind of title that makes you think, did I hear that right? The Form of the Book. And I think, the levity, these are very serious issues when we're talking about what language we attach to things, but it's important to keep a sense of levity as well. While I was in New York at the Center for Book Arts, I did take part of a day and went up to the Grolier Club, and they had this really marvelous exhibition that included a lot of different binding forms and papers and the source material. So this is specifically this was a gift of Timothy Barrett, who wrote a brilliant book on Japanese papermaking and has done a lot, and not just Japanese papermaking, but he was at the Iowa Center for the Book. And this is dried Nepalese and Tibetan plants used for paper. Okay. And back to Amy Lee, who I mentioned earlier, who did not come up in my initial search of the center's catalog. This is one of her books in the center. The cover is Hanji. The interior is actually a canvas, and this is all handwritten out. And the reason I brought this is it brings us full circle back to Angela Lawrence, because this is also Chuangzu's. It's her transcription and reworking of a text by Chuangzu. So that was one of the serendipitous connections that I found that I really believe can only happen when you're physically in a collection, working with superb archivists and librarians like Gillian Lee, who know what's where, and they're getting new material all the time. So I really had the luxury of sort of poking around in the stacks and seeing what was there. these are hot out of my email as of this morning. Angela Lawrence very generously shared 2 more works which use mulberry paper because it conceptually relates to the piece. The Sir Thomas More, and that's wordplay on the Latin for mulberry and his having planted a mulberry tree because of more and more. His last name being he was seeing a reference to the plant. And then Su Shi Boat to the Red Cliffs, Part 1, Part 2 of Chibifu, 1082. Let's see, I have a few more slides. I am going to, I'll wrap it up in a few minutes and then I can come back to this slide. If we want to invite, oh, Angela, do you feel like saying a few words about these pieces right now? Again, not to put you on the spot. And I actually, because I'm screen sharing, can't see all of the participants. Since I don't hear Angela, I think I'll come back at the, oh, you've raised your hand. Yes.
Okay.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Hi. I wasn't able to unmute myself. Only the host could do it. So sorry. And I'm doing this on an iPhone because I'm in New York and I let my husband keep the laptop that is much easier to do Zoom from in Italy. So I'm not very nimble, but if you can hear me and see me, I am able to talk.
We can hear and see you. And I would love, you know, we're limited on time, and I'm mindful of not going over, but it's such an opportunity to have you actually speak to your work because the new catalog that you sent, you are one of those artists where, you know, your career is long enough and you have this new work and it's responding to the changes in language. Do you feel like adding anything to that or commenting on these specific pieces?
Yeah. So I had the great fortune, I just have a BA from Brown University and I took courses at Rhode Island School of Design as well. But at Brown, the only art course I took was a papermaking course. So I, as an undergraduate, did both Western and Eastern papermaking. So I was well aware of all of the terms. In 1993, I made the chewing gum book, Chewing Zoo, although they pronounce it more like tsuh. Anyways, and I did actually, I was trying to make a joke. You picked up on this. The fact that it's about eating and also philosophy and ruminating. I did choose to use the term rice for rice paper, even though I knew that it was kozo, just because I'm a conceptual artist that likes to link things. So you were correct in your assessment there.
Perfect. That's great. And when you sent the Sir Thomas More / More piece, I thought this is likely intentional, but without actually speking to you, I wouldn't have known that. So, yeah.
Right, because you
so
actually knew that the Latin word for mulberry, you actually knew that already.
I did, but I'd forgotten that anecdote about him planting one in his yard. So,
yeah, so he was, he and also Erasmus made puns on his name for his whole life. So I felt justified doing the Sir Thomas More pun. But yes, the mulberry paper I had to use mulberry paper because of the him planting the mulberry tree. So the way that I try to convey historical information and facts and scholarly material in every aspect of the work of art. And so that was the purpose for that. And then in the Sushi Boat to the Red Cliffs, it was important for me to use mulberry paper just because of the tradition of where that paper came from and this motif in poetry and art of the journey to the Red Cliffs, or Red Cliffs Rhapsody by the song poet Sushi.
thank you so much. Thank you for chiming in. Did you want to add any additional thoughts or?
Well, I just regarding the sushi boat, I just wanted to say that there, you know, Sushi was one of the most famous poets of the song era, so 1082. But his poem, which is really in every sort of Chinese poetry anthology, is it was so popular that it became represented in art, not just in China, but for centuries in Japanese art. So I felt justified in making a Japanese food because of that. And, you know, more recently, a video game and also a film of the Journey to the Red Cliffs, or Red Cliffs Rhapsody. Red Cliffs has become very famous. So I just wanted to say that it's again a conscious use of mixing of two cultures. That's all.
Thank you so much. Great. I really appreciate you coming and chiming in today, Angela. And actually, just
if you have any more questions or anybody else, oh, sorry, I needed to make a clarification. You earlier asked whether about the performance, when the performance of the gum book took place, and so you and Corinna Reynolds are both correct. There was a performance when I was not there during the summer of, I believe, 2015, during a show. I was unable to make it from Maine, but the other chewing gum performance, as Corinna pointed out, was when I was the honoree of the gala in for my contribution to book art in 2019. So that's there were two performances, and the second one I was present. And what I do is I generally get volunteers from the audience, and then in turn, each of the four volunteers open up their piece of gum, read the edible text that's printed on the gum of ancient Taoist philosophy, and then they start chewing the gum, and we all ruminate over the relationship between the phrase and the flavor. So the participant has to say what they think the flavor is. And this was based on, the information was based on a course of ancient Chinese religion from that I studied as an undergraduate, actually. So.
Excellent. Thank you. And it was new information for me also, that's kind of I don't know if you said it was an open edition, but you're continuing to add new phrases.
No, I don't add new phrases, but I did not, it's not a numbered edition. I get commissioned to create it. So it's open-ended in the sense that there are, well, hundreds and hundreds, probably over 1,000 copies that I have made by hand of this piece over, since 1993, because now it's about 30 years old.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And looping back to actually when I saw Red Cliffs, that reminded me of a fellow papermaker, Helen Hubert, who has a papermaking retreat at Red Cliffs in Colorado. So I thought another bizarre coincidence, totally different places, same name. That was an interesting little connection this morning. So thank you again, Angela. I think I only have a few more slides. So additional resources, basically this is limited to the ones that were front and center. There are so many more, but these were, I want to invite everyone who's here and who goes to the Center for Book Arts to continue building your book and paper community. May Babcock, who has also contributed greatly to Hand Paper Making Magazine, has a website called Paper Slurry. And I wanted to feature this project that she has of mapping. She's, I believe, in the process of updating it, but even as of, a little while ago, this is just, it is a worldwide map. So I only featured North America, the studios that she is aware of and in touch with, but it's much broader. So I wanted to put that out there for everyone to be aware of. If you are somewhere else and think there is not papermaking near you, there might be, check that site. Because this is also one thing I found both with printmaking, but also with my historical research. If you haven't made something, it can be really hard to understand it. Hard/impossible sometimes. So Angela mentioned having had experience with papermaking and very intentionally choosing certain terms. But I've seen printmaking types misidentified in books, in scholarly books, all the time. I was taught by someone specialized in mezzotint. Mezzotint is not very common because it's so laborious. It's a very specific period in art history, but there are contemporary mezzotint artists. She gets sent things all the time. People say, oh, I found this great mezzotint, sending it to you. Not mezzotint, it's an aquatint or some other method. So Dieudonné. I share this because I found out about it. It was either last night or this morning. They have these great virtual talks coming up. So I shared May Babcock's paper slurry. May is actually giving a talk through Dieudonné about paper, plants, and identity on April 27th. So if you Google Dieudonné, there are also, this is much sooner, March 14th, about process and practice. Abdulreza Aminlari and Nazanin Norouzi. And there are so many papermaking traditions, all of which come with their specific terminology and approaches. So I just wanted to share Dieudonné as a local resource in New York, located in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Actually, I believe Dieudonné and Center for Book Arts were once upon a time both in Soho. So they were also neighbors. And that is the end of my PowerPoint. I hope I didn't drone on too long. I have so many more thoughts and thanks to share, but I also know that there are paper makers and book artists in the audience. So before I keep talking, I'd like to open it up for any questions. Maybe there are no questions. Maybe I didn't provoke people enough.
Alta, it's Mina.
Hi, Mina.
That was fabulous. And, we had so many incredible conversations as we were working on your article together. And so I've got just so many, more questions and thoughts that I would love to, kind of further discuss. But one thing that really kind of came across, and I'm going to really be thinking about this, is your comment about, about not advocating for the erasure of terms that we feel might be outdated or, not thoughtful or not in terms of contemporary context would really translate or transmit, the kind of meaning that might have had certain kind of credibility in the past. And it made me think of the idea of sort of toppling monuments, public monuments. What does it mean to erase these things? And how do you build an archive where you can make room for, not the Library of Congress, we're just kind of change those terms and make them into the, whatever we say now makes sense.
Which might change.
Which might change too. So, I'd be really curious to hear our archivists' take on this issue, because this is something I deal with also with hand paper making and some of the work that we're currently moving into, which is we have these new guiding principles that actually May Babcock, you mentioned her, helped initiate at the publication, and one of them is about collective work and the idea of really respecting agency, voice, and place of all of our of all who read, all who contribute, all who participate in the publications or in the world of what we're doing at hand paper making. And so what happens there is that things that I might do as an editor saying for consistency, we would want to use this term, or we want to like, shift this, because later on, if someone's doing that Google search, they're going to it's not going to come up because it's not sort of part of, it doesn't get captured and classified. Anyway, I'm just really, that was a fascinating point you made. And I just would love to hear, if anybody who's on the Zoom here is kind of working in that arena. I would welcome, hearing your thoughts on it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Mina. And before I'm hoping there's some archivists. I don't know, Jillian, if you want to chime in with your thoughts on this. But I do want to acknowledge, Mina, I was so deeply, deeply grateful for the editorial work that you did with me. Because I always feel like my work is all over the place a little bit with this talk, but especially with that article. And you really helped me sort of stay focused and narrow it down. And of course, as soon as I got my print issue, I was just, I do almost feel as though this needs to be a series of articles. They don't all need to be by me. In fact, I think they shouldn't. I think it does take a community. And yeah, any archivists or Jillian, do you have thought, not to put you on the spot? I know you do so much there at the center.
I would love to chime in just a little bit, because my area, this isn't really my area of expertise, so I'm not going to say anything that I'm not sure about, but speaking from my experience as a librarian who's only worked in really small arts libraries, so much of the problems that we encounter when it comes to changing terminology is just the amount of time that it could take to go back and change terminologies in records that have existed and have been being made for, in the case of Center for Book Arts Library, records that have been being created for more than 10 years. And as larger professional networks and groups of librarians work together to agree on definitions of terms, changing the way that we describe and categorize and catalog objects after terms are after it's decided that a term will change, that is something that we can do, but it's the going back that is kind of the challenge, and is where these conversations are really important to contextualize those records that, with great effort could be changed. But when it comes to like realistic small institutions, even like the Newberry Library, not a small institution, but still has those artifacts of back when understandings were different.
Mm-hmm. And you're actually reminding me of an essay that was in a book that I translated. The book itself was called The Dynamic Library, and it was basically proceeds from a public presentation that took place in Switzerland for a specific an art collector's library. And there was a contribution that was all about the history behind the creation of what is believed to be the world's first card catalog at the I'm forgetting the institutional name for the major imperial library in Vienna. So, and there was a big dispute between the head librarian and the cataloger. The good news is that we got the card catalog. That one still exists, but just the disagreements between those two people who both wanted greater access to knowledge and communication and language, and could not agree on how to organize it, how to have people access their collections. And the very fact that, so much of actually the interesting things I saw in the archive at the Center for Book Arts that I didn't share today were, the history of the center itself. So yeah, there's a lot there. Jillian, do you need us to wrap up? Right. I see that it's 1 p.m.
No, we have more time for questions or thoughts if there are any more. We can go for another 5 to 10 minutes. I saw actually an interesting comment in the chat that I'd like to read aloud if that's okay.
Please.
But Linda said, having spent lots of time researching books in libraries that use washi, I find the most common terms for Japanese papers are, quote, Japan paper, unquote, and, quote, cream wove, unquote, which is very interesting.
It is interesting. So I didn't go into everything I delved into in my article on hand paper making, but there were so many, I got so much help from conservators, from other linguists. But these terms are fascinating. Japan paper, I believe, was specifically a brand. And some of these names get applied by the merchants or the traders or the companies that distribute these papers in the US or you know, abroad. There is a whole, I am just for brevity's sake going to point people to my article, because Amy Lee helped me explore these notions of, as nation states opened their borders and in various colonial periods and trading, the terminology changed. So hanji and washi, hanji means Korean paper. Now there are many nuances and shades of different terms for types of paper, but hanji is this umbrella term. And washi did not exist before Japan was exporting its paper and encountering other papers from other places. Washi is Japanese paper linguistically. So that is another thing that was a history that was hidden to me. I did not linguistically have access to it. I see, oh, Mina, the chat is blowing up. Great contributions. But you know that even every single language adjusts with time and its time period and who it's encountering. So I found it interesting that you know, washi was very specifically a need to assert that a nation state and its arts and crafts. Same with hanji.
Something that I saw that was interesting in Linda's other comment about the artist referring to Western papers really specifically, like Reeves, BFK, I think actually could point towards artists' lack of understanding about larger types of paper, and they may just be referring to it based on a brand because they wouldn't know how to refer to the paper in a different way. So I think that maybe both of these issues point towards a lack of understanding around paper and artists.
Yeah. So, and thank you for looping back to that, Corinna. That was Linda's comment. Actually, that's referring to the to Carruthers' book, not the Sushi Tales. It was right. the tea. But yes, it's a really excellent observation. And Corinna, you were generous enough to put me in contact with the old head of the paper department at our late great New York Central Art Supply, which I'm sure many of you in the audience walked up those flights of stairs. And not once, you know, the entire world was represented in paper there. Nowhere did I ever see the term rice paper. And I think, David, you know, that those locations and specific people can be so excellent in terms of the educational work. Like I know Mina does a lot of it with her contributors to Hand Paper Making magazine. But that is actually one of my upcoming conversations that I need to continue having, is specifically how he handled, you know, people who would come in and ask for rice paper. When I first reached out to him, I basically said, I'm investigating this misnomer of rice paper, but I didn't say like, I know it's not a thing, but can we talk about it? And so he wrote, as you know, rice paper is not made of rice, it's not a thing. But I think he had a really excellent point. I think he believed I was doing very specific, trying to identify. He was like, if you know when you bought it or where it was from, all of that is helpful. And I think that, like, my follow-up questions for him are going to deal with, how do we handle objects that don't have complete information? And we don't want to misidentify them if we don't know what they are, but speculate, make educated guesses, or continue having those conversations to shed more light on the history of these objects. Here we got Linda chiming in again. Washi is traditional Japanese paper and Yoshi means Western paper. Yep. New terms developed as other types of paper were introduced to Japan. And I do think, my fixation with rice paper is one little example, and I felt like I could contribute something to this very confusing misnomer, specifically informed by my background coming from translation, but not knowing Japanese or Chinese or Korean, I'm dependent on other experts, and they've been very generous. But once you know the language and you can see, it's very, very helpful. So I don't know if there are any other comments. I would like to make sure, I think, again, Corinna and Jillian and Allison and everyone at Center for Book Arts. Oh, I almost forgot to say, I am also, one of the loveliest encounters I made while I was at Center for Book Arts was with Ronnie Gross, who teaches letterpress and has very, very generously offered to help me create a book. So I am reaching out to paper makers far and wide who make paper that might be seen as rice paper, even though hopefully everyone here now knows that rice paper is not made of rice. But kozo, washi, all these different types of materials that are used. And hopefully my plan is, of course, it will develop as it comes together, but to create a book with either swatches or tipped in pieces so that this can actually be an object, a small edition that will then enter the Center for Book Arts. And of course, it'll be, if anyone else does the keyword search I did for rice paper, it'll be one of the first things they come across, and hopefully operate as a key to seeing the different types of paper. And my focus on, I've thought about extending it to more historic papers, but it's easier, I think, at the moment to work with contemporary paper makers and feature, many of whom already have work in the collections. But that's sort of my next step. So this is very much an ongoing project.
Fab. And I'm so excited about that, Alta. Are there any other questions or comments from audience members? In that case, I would love to thank everybody so much for joining us for this midday event. Alta, thank you so much. I had the pleasure of working with you during your research period, but I still feel like I learned so much from your talk, and I really appreciate it. I would love to let everybody know that if you are newly, or if you have been for years interested in paper making, or especially marbled paper, we do have a kind of related event coming up on March 25th, which is a Saturday. We're having a marbled paper sale at noon here at CBA. If you're based in New York, I'm going to drop the event link in the chat right now. But you'll be able to meet paper artists and talk to Mindel Dubansky, who's the editor of Pattern and Flow, which is a decorative paper exhibition catalog that was just published. So I just had to plug that really quickly. And once again, thank you, Alta, so very much. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and anyone who hasn't gotten to see that show, I got the catalog. The show actually Mindell Dubansky's show up at the Grolier Club. I think it's still up, right? For a little while now. Highly
It's still up.
recommended. Yeah.
Mhm. So good. Yeah. Also highly recommend.
I saw some amazing marbleized papers when I was up there. Slightly off topic for my talk today, but I didn't think I loved marble. I found marbleized paper interesting, but oh my gosh, that collection completely converted me.
Yeah. And the Met's collection of paste papers is incredible. So, and if anyone's interested in that too, I think that's a really good place to go do a little extra research. Well, thanks, Alta. This has been great. And Angela, great to see you. Mina,
Oh, yes,
also
thank
great
you,
to see you.
Angela.
Thank you for your contributions. And hopefully we'll see everyone at the center soon.
Thank you so much.